Hi, everyone. I'm Thérèse, and this is New York Girl Again, The After, the podcast for caregivers who have survived the hardest chapter of their lives and are now gathering both the courage and the strength to write the next one. Today is Mother's Day. For some lucky people, Mother's Day is brunch reservations in Champagne, beautiful bouquets of flowers, handwritten cards filled with love and gratitude, and smiling family photos gathered around a table. But for others, Mother's Day feels like trying to hold on to a life raft in the middle of the ocean while wave after wave crashes over you, just hoping you can survive the day without emotionally drowning. It feels like being immersed in a world that keeps celebrating while you are quietly carrying an absence so enormous that sometimes you still cannot even believe it's real. Because once your mother dies, something inside you changes forever. And if you are also her caregiver, the grief becomes layered in ways that are almost impossible to explain to people who've never lived it. Because you didn't just lose your mother. You lost the woman who once protected you, and later became the woman you spent years trying to protect. The woman who once stayed awake worrying about you, and eventually became the woman you stayed awake worrying about. The woman who comforted you when you were hurting, and later became the person you tried to comfort through pain, fear, illness, confusion, and decline. The woman whose voice could calm you before you even understood what comfort was. You lost the person who gave you life, and the person whose life you tried to hold together for as long as humanly possible. And when that person is gone, the silence afterward can feel unbearable. Because the world keeps moving, while part of you is still reaching for someone who is no longer there. So today's episode is for every daughter, every son, every caregiver who is trying to survive Mother's Day while carrying both overwhelming love and devastating loss in the very same heart. People prepare you for certain things. They prepare you for funerals. They prepare you for sympathy cards, casseroles, flower arrangements, and paperwork. But almost no one prepares you for the after. No one prepares you for the moment, weeks, months, and even years later, when something happens in your life and you instinctively reach for your phone to call your mother before remembering she's gone. This still happens to me sometimes, even 12 and a half years later. No one prepares you for how emotionally disorienting it feels to lose the person who was once your first emotional home. Because psychologically, mothers are often much more than just parents. For many of us, our mothers were the very first people our nervous systems ever learned safety from. Before language, before memory, before we understood the world, our brains learned comfort through their voice, their touch, their presence, their reassurance. And when that person dies, a huge piece of your heart dies too. especially if you were also her caregiver, because then the relationship changes twice. First, she was the woman protecting you. Then right before your eyes, you became the person trying to protect her. I think there is something uniquely painful about becoming motherless, no matter how old you are. I was 44 when my mom died. Because when your mother dies, you lose one of the last people on earth who knew you from the beginning. The person who knew your childhood voice, your fears, your awkward stages, your family stories. The version of you before life broke your heart a few times. Even complicated mother-child relationships still often carry that truth. Your mother is usually one of the last living witnesses to your earliest self. And when she dies, many people experience what psychologists call identity disruption. Because suddenly, the person who reflected part of your history back to you is no longer here. And I think that's one reason the grief can feel so destabilizing. You don't just miss her. You miss who you were in her presence. And if you were caregiving too, the identity loss becomes even larger. And then sometimes there's the guilt, the endless replaying of moments. Did I do enough? Was I patient enough? Should I have noticed something sooner? Did she know how very much I loved her? Could I have handled things differently? Caregivers carry impossible levels of responsibility because love convinces us we should somehow have been able to stop decline, aging, illness, even death itself. But caregiving was never about perfection. It was about love expressed through showing up over and over again, through exhaustion and fear and sacrifice. And I think many caregivers forget something incredibly important afterward. Your mother probably did not need perfection from you. She just needed love. And despite the exhaustion, despite the mistakes, despite the moments you lost patience or felt emotionally overwhelmed, you gave it. You stayed. You showed up. You loved her through one of the hardest chapters of both of your lives. And that matters more than your grieving mind may allow you to believe right now. Mother's Day grief is different because the entire world participates in the reminder. Flowers everywhere, advertisements, mother-daughter brunches, social media posts. And meanwhile, many grieving daughters and sons are just trying to survive the day without emotionally collapsing. Sometimes it can even feel isolating, like everyone else still belongs to a world that you no longer fit inside. Especially because caregiver grief often becomes invisible after the funeral ends. People stop asking how you're doing. The sympathy cards start coming. But the grief often deepens afterward. Because during caregiving, survival mode takes over. Your brain says, keep functioning, handle the crisis, stay strong, keep going. And then after the loss, the emotional reality finally catches up. That's why many caregivers experience depression, anxiety, brain fog, exhaustion, loneliness, weight gain, physical symptoms, or even PTSD-like responses after caregiving ends, because they spent years suppressing their own needs in order to survive someone else's crisis. And then one day, everything becomes quiet. Too quiet. Just silence. And sometimes that silence feels deafening. So if Mother's Day hurts today, if you feel emotional seeing everyone celebrate, if you feel exhausted from carrying grief that people no longer see, if part of you still cannot believe your mother is really gone, please hear me. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You are grieving someone whose presence helped shape your memories, your identity, and your understanding of love itself. Of course, the loss feels profound. And if you are also her caregiver, please stop telling yourself you should be over it by now. Caregiving changes people deeply. Loving someone through illness and decline changes you. And losing your mother changes people forever. But one of the things modern grief psychology now understands is that healing does not necessarily come from letting go. It often comes from learning how to carry love differently, to continue the bond internally, to carry their voice, their lessons, their humor, their tenderness, their strength, and their love forward into your own life. Because grief is not evidence that love failed. Grief is often evidence of how deeply love existed. And maybe healing in the after is not about moving on. Maybe it is learning how to slowly build a life again, while still carrying love and grief together in the very same heart. So today, if you are grieving your mother, if you spent years caring for her, if Mother's Day feels more painful than beautiful right now, you are not alone. And I hope you are gentle with your heart today, not pretending to be okay, not forcing yourself to be positive, just gentleness. Because surviving the after without your mother is one of the loneliest emotional experiences many people will ever face. And if nobody has told you this lately, I am proud of you for continuing anyway, for getting out of bed, for rebuilding slowly, for carrying grief that most people cannot fully see, and for still trying to create a life again after losing someone who was your everything. If this episode spoke to your heart today, please share it with someone navigating grief, caregiving, or life after losing their mother. And if you're looking for support, reflection, or connection after caregiving, you can also learn more about our one-to-one guided reset sessions on our website, newyorkgirlagain.com. I'm Thérèse, and this is New York Girl Again, the After.